Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. My name's Emma Lefebvre, and I've been getting asked a lot of questions about what colors I have in my palette from Shinhan. I have been using this palette with my Shinhan watercolors. It's the PWC brand for a while now, and I absolutely love them. So today I thought I would give you a little tour of the colors that I have in here, because I think this is by far my smallest palette that I've used on YouTube. Smallest meaning the least amount of colors. I usually have like 2 rows of colors. I have my ultimate palette, which I'm also going to give you a little tour of why I've kind of dwindled down my collection, and give you an idea of why I've chosen these colors, what colors I recommend having in your palette, and also just giving you a glimpse into why you don't need so many colors. But let's just jump in and get started. Okay friends, so I get a lot of questions about what paints I use and what colors are in my palette. So today I thought I would do a little bit of a palette tour and explain how I choose what colors go in my palette. So this is my current palette that I use. It is called, or it's from the company Mr. Pen that I found on Amazon. I really liked how sturdy it looked, and I liked the case. I have been using like cheap plastic palettes like this for a very long time, which aren't bad. There's nothing wrong with them, but this one just looked a little bit sturdier, and there weren't as many wells, which I was kind of going for, because I'm going to show you in a minute my older palettes that I've used in so many other videos. They have so many wells to put paints in, and I used to like fill them to the max, and you really don't need that many colors. You honestly don't even need this many colors. This color and this color is actually the same. They're just 2 different brands, but you don't even need all of these. I've just been really enjoying using a more limited palette recently, and one thing I like about this palette is that there's this mixing well here, but you can also take this tray out and use this here if you need it. So there's just lots of areas to mix colors if you need it. So I want to go through all the colors in my current go-to palette, because this isn't the collection of colors that I suggest everybody has. I think I kind of go through phases of what colors I really enjoy working with, and it changes, but then there are also some constants that have always been in my palettes. So I'm going to go through all that, and I am going to swatch these for you, but first I just kind of want to show you my evolution of some of my palettes. So this was one of my first palettes. I don't know if you guys scroll back to old videos, you will see this palette, and it is still full. Like, I mean, I've filled it up and then I moved on to new paints. So this is a perfectly good palette. I can still use it. There's no mold, there's no dust or anything like that. It's been stored well. But this was like a very cheap plastic palette that I got on Amazon. And I believe all of these colors, except this one, are all Winsor & Newton Cotman watercolors, which are student grade watercolors. So you can see I have a bunch of different colors in here, which you don't need, but a lot of these are my go-to ones. So this one is Opera Rose from Winsor & Newton Professional, and I actually don't really like it at all. And I have a few oranges in here that honestly, I never really use orange. I tend to mix my oranges, but you can definitely see there were a few that I really used a lot. Even still, they're still pretty full because I stopped using it. My Permanent Rose from Winsor & Newton, I think this is Cobalt Blue, but then I moved on to new paints. So one question I get asked a lot is, what brand do I recommend? Now, the thing is, with professional watercolors, I couldn't really tell you the difference between a lot of brands. I originally started off with like super cheap like Artist Loft watercolors, which were like kid watercolors, awful. But when I started moving up to not more professional, but student grade watercolors from tubes, they were my Cotman Winsor & Newton watercolors. So they were these watercolors that came in this tube. I think this was one of the first colors that I bought too, Emerald, and I never really liked it, so there's still a bunch in there. It's still good, but the 8mm tubes are what I started off with. I think I started off with 5 colors that I got at a workshop, and then just developed my collection over time. If you are brand new to watercolor, you want to create your own palette like this, but you don't want to break the bank, Cotman from Winsor & Newton is a really great option. I love these and I used them for the longest time, and the only reason why I moved up to the professional brand, which are these ones, was because a viewer gifted me a bunch of her older ones. So then I just started to build my collection off of that. So I moved up to professional paints because this became my job and I thought it would be a good idea to use professional. But Cotman were great. I would say the only difference is that the only difference that I could really see was that the Cotman ones didn't activate as fast. They're really nice. They stay in the palette. They don't really crack or anything. And they're amazing to use, especially for beginners, but they just didn't activate as fast as professional ones. Weren't as pigmented, but they were still great. So I was in love with Winsor & Newton because that was the only brand that I used at the beginning, and I still love them. But there are a few other brands that I really enjoy too. Like I said, if you're going professional, I don't think you can go wrong. You can go Daniel Smith, My Mary Blue, Shinhan, tons of brands that you really could just go with and be happy. It's just mostly the colors that you want to choose. So these brands are really good. And this was the palette that I first started with. Okay, so then once I moved to a more professional palette, I can't remember. I think this one was next. I don't actually remember because there were some that I gave away, but this became my palette for a little while. Look how crusty these all are. They're still really good. Great shape to still use them. None of them are dusty or moldy or anything like that. But you can see I eventually got more colors, and these became my professional Winsor & Newton watercolors. And besides this one, which is Buff Titanium from Daniel Smith, every other paint in here is from Winsor & Newton professional line, and I loved it. Again, though, I didn't use all of them. I didn't need all of these colors. There are a lot that I really loved, but like this cobalt turquoise I didn't use very often. Prussian blue I didn't find myself using as often, but I find myself using more now. Again, the oranges, I know they look worn, but I had used them for a very long time. Magenta I found myself not using as much. But I was really kind of just figuring out what I liked. And like I said, I kind of went through different phases of what I really enjoyed and what I didn't. But I realized again that I didn't need a palette that was this big. But then I moved on to the same size palette, but I put in Paul Rubens watercolors. So this was the newer one. And I also really enjoy Paul Rubens watercolors. The colors are super vibrant. I really enjoyed using them. Again, same kind of quality, really beautiful, great array of colors. It's just, there were a lot of colors. And then I just kept getting new brands, and companies were reaching out asking if I would test new ones. And I just kind of found myself falling in love with other brands as well, and a smaller selection. So these are all really great paints. And then after this, I was gifted a lot of paints to try out from Shinhan, My Mary Blue, Michael Harding, which is amazing, Paul Rubens, and I think Sennelier that I bought on my own. There were a few other ones, and I decided to create the ultimate palette with a palette that Shinhan gifted me. So this was the palette. I did do a video. This is by far the largest palette I have. It is really unnecessary and so much fun. But look at all these colors. This was my ultimate palette. Check out the video. I'll link it below. But there are so many colors in here, so many amazing colors, but honestly, I don't use them. That's the problem, is I don't use them. So while this is amazing to have and so much fun to use at times, it's very unnecessary. So I find myself gravitating back towards my Shinhan palette, which I'm going to swatch for you again, just because it's easier to use and maneuver. Doesn't take up too much space on my desk. Again, this is a lot of fun, but unnecessary. So if you are looking for what colors are in this, I did make like a swatch card that I created with that video. And I can go through some of the colors that I really enjoy in here and would put in my palette. But for now, let's swatch the palette that I'm using now and show you what colors that I suggest and that I'm loving in my palette. Okay, so let's start by swatching the colors that I have, and I'll explain why I have them in my palette. Okay, so the first color I have has been more of a newer color. It is Burnt Sienna, and by newer color, I mean newer to me that I have, that's like a must-have in my palette. And that's because I used to use Burnt Umber for my go-to brown. And I do like Burnt Umber, but I find that with Burnt Sienna, it has this hue to it that other browns don't have. It has this really nice like orangey undertone, which I really love. But also if you add other colors to it, you can get a really nice brown like burnt umber. You can mix a burnt umber with burnt sienna. So it's a really nice base color to have. I love this orangey kind of rusty color. And the way I actually mix black in my palette, because I don't have a black in here, is I mix burnt sienna with indigo, and it's an absolutely beautiful black. So that's kind of why I have that in my palette, and I moved away from burnt umber. I just found this was a lot better for color mixing, and I just love the color in general. Okay. So that's the only brown I have. And then moving on to greens, which are my absolute favorite. This green is called Shadow Green, and it's by Shinhan, and it's very similar to Perline Green from Winsor & Newton. I don't know other greens that are comparable. I just don't have a lot of other brands, but it is very comparable to Perline Green from Winsor & Newton. I'm sure Daniel Smith has a very similar color, which I'm sure people in the comments can let you know, because there's a lot of Daniel Smith fans out there, and I do like Daniel Smith paints. I just never really had the opportunity to develop a collection of them because I already had so many other paints. I didn't want to start from scratch and buy a bunch of Daniel Smith colors. However, I do have one Daniel Smith color in here, which is my absolute favorite, which I'm going to get to. But this Shadow Green is very, very beautiful. I love it, love it, love it. I love it for dark accents in my florals and like leaves. And I also love it for a lot of landscape work. So there's that one. Then I have my olive green. So I used to use sap green, which was kind of like my go-to green. And I like it, but there's something about this like olive green that has like a tint of almost like a green gold to it, which I really love. I just love olive green in general. And while it's beautiful on its own, I also like mixing it with like a blue, and you get kind of like a sap green color when you mix it with different blues. So again, a lot of the colors that I'm choosing are because I like them uniquely on their own, but they also are great for different mixing abilities. So olive green is one of my favorites. I know a lot of people love green gold, which is really nice too, but it's a little bit too yellowy for me. I love an olive green that you can use on its own and to mix. So there's that one. Then this is the only Daniel Smith paint in my palette, and this is called Undersea Green, and this is probably my all-time favorite green. It's actually pretty close to olive green. It has that olive undertone to it. I love like a good browny, yellowy green, as you can tell. But this color is just so stunning, which is funny because there was a Paul Rubens gift set that I had gotten of like 5 granulating colors, and one of the colors was identical to this, and it was absolutely beautiful. And then I saw someone talking about this Undersea Green from Daniel Smith, and then I just bought it, and I swatched them side by side, and they ended up being the exact same color, basically. Different brands, but same pigment numbers and everything. So I love this color, and if you know me, greens are my favorite. These are my all-time 3 favorite greens. All right, so let's move on to the bluish blues. And the reason why I'm saying that is because, would you count indigo as a blue? I think it's a blue. At least this one has a really nice blue undertone. I almost find it's kind of like more of a neutral. Not really, I wouldn't consider it completely a blue, but it does definitely have a blue undertone to it. Indigo is a must in my palette. I love it because I love it on its own, again, but its mixing abilities are great. Mixing this with burnt sienna creates a beautiful black. It's a great way to darken a color without using black, I find. And I just love the deepness of it and the moodiness of it. It's one of my all-time favorite colors. I find myself using it so much. I love indigo. All right, and then I have Prussian Blue, which for the longest time I did not care to have in my palette. It's a really nice blue, but I was like going more towards like turquoises and stuff. But I find this is a really nice run-of-the-mill kind of cool blue. It can also darken colors. It's not a must-have in my palette, but it is a nice addition. And if you like this shade, I would definitely go for it. It also, this one specifically, blooms, like does that wet on wet watercolor bloom really well. I don't know why, but it explodes and I love it. All right, the next one is Ultramarine, which is a must-have in my palette. I find Ultramarine is the best warm blue color you can get. Cobalt blue is very similar, but I just like the deepness and the richness of a good ultramarine. Ultramarine also tends to be more of a granulating color, which if you don't know what granulating colors are, they are colors that the pigments are ground a little less fine, they're a little chunkier, so you get a little bit of separation with them. And if you mix them with other colors, you can get really cool separation and really cool textures from them. Not all ultramarines are granulating, but I'd say most of them are, most that I have experienced. And if you want to know more about granulating pigments, you can definitely look up my name and granulating paints on YouTube and you will see exactly what that is. So that's definitely a must. Then I can't remember what color this is. It's also a little bit mixed with green right now, which is just like my go-to when I mix it with olive green. I forget what this one is called. I think this one is Phthalo Blue red shade, which is a nice run-of-the-mill kind of blue. It's a little bit, not turquoisey, but just kind of like I want to say like a primary blue. And this used to be my go-to over Prussian Blue. They're kind of similar. I find this one a little bit more on the vibrant side, which I really like. I find Prussian Blue to be a little bit darker and moody, if that makes sense. And this is just a really nice kind of run-of-the-mill blue. And if you lighten it up, it can be really nice and light, a really nice sky color. I don't know. I just like it and I like it for mixing, but it's not a must-have. I do suggest having some sort of kind of mid blue that's not too warm like ultramarine and not too cool like a turquoise in there. So like a phthalo blue or a Prussian blue is a really good idea. Okay, then we have this one, which is blue pale, which I would say is very similar to cerulean blue, which I don't love cerulean blue. Cerulean blue is supposedly kind of like sky blue. Like if you're trying to paint the sky, like a nice blue sky, this is kind of the color. Now it's not identical at all. I'd say it's a little bit cooler than a cerulean, but if I can find, so here's a cerulean sky blue from My Merry Blue. It's similar. This one is more like of a genuine like cerulean because it is cerulean. And this is a little bit, I'd say, cooler than a cerulean. But I found cerulean blues in a lot of different brands to not be as pigmented. I find you have to do a lot of mixing and lifting to kind of get that deep cerulean color. And I just enjoyed this, I think it's called Blue Pale Blue from Shinhan a little bit more. It's a nice alternative without doing cerulean. I just find cerulean's never really that pigmented. Maybe it's the brands I've tried, but I find across the board in a lot of situations, they're just not the best. So the Blue Pale Blue. I still don't know what it is. It's called Blue Pale. I just looked. Okay. Then here I have Lavender. Now this is not a must-have at all, but I just love it. I am absolutely in love with lavender. I love it for florals, but I also love it for shadows. If you ever look at the snow in not the dark, but like kind of at dusk when it's all nice and shadowy, it looks a little bit lavender-like. And I just really enjoy this color. So I've just been adding it to my palette. This one is also by Shinhan, but I don't know, there's something about it that I really love. If you do not want to have or buy a lavender for your palette, what you can do is mix a little bit of ultramarine with like a basic kind of purple, like a tiny bit of purple, and you'll get a lavender. Add a little bit of white. There you go. But I just love having the tube as is. Okay, then next, my purple is my go-to purple. It's very similar to dioxazine purple from Winsor & Newton. I really love a nice deep purple like this. This is from Shinhan. It is called Permanent Violet. Yes, Permanent Violet. Okay, it's very similar, comparable to dioxazine purple, or I think the professional one for Winsor & Newton is like I don't even remember what it was called, but something with brackets, dioxazine. I don't know what it is, but I love this deep, deep, deep purple. I like mauve too, but I find this is the best for mixing to get some really beautiful deep colors. And you can also mix like more of a mauve color by adding a little bit of pink to this, and then you're golden. You don't need many other purples. This is a great mixing purple. Also, if you mix it with green, like a darker green, like the shadow green or a hooker's green, you can get beautiful like eucalyptus colors, but you could also get a beautiful gray. I don't know. It's always been a go-to purple in my palette. That's the only purple I need. I absolutely love it. All right, and then my go-to pink. My pink is Permanent Rose. Okay, so there's a couple different pinks that I really enjoy. This one from Shinhan is my favorite. It's just, it's really vibrant and bright. I always loved the Permanent Rose from Winsor & Newton. Another one that's comparable that is just as bright and beautiful from Michael Harding is Quinacridone Rose. If you can find a Quinacridone Rose, it is very similar, but I just love this shade of pink over magenta. I don't know, magenta has a bit of a purpliness to it, so I find if you mix like a tiny, tiny bit of purple with this Permanent Rose, you can get a very similar magenta color. But I love this pink, really watered down. It's really beautiful and really vibrant. It's absolutely gorgeous. One of my favorites. All right. Now let's move on to our red. I think this is Permanent Red from Shinhan, which is a really nice kind of base red. It's like a cherry red. It's not too orangey. I find trying to find a red that's not too warm where it has that orange undertone. So like a cadmium red that I started off with the Cotman Winsor & Newton one is very orangey. And to get a really nice deep red, you'd have to go like cadmium red deep. This is a really nice, bright, vibrant red, but you can also dull it down with a little bit of green. You can darken it with a little bit of purple. It's a really nice base red that's not too orangey, and I absolutely love it. Okay. So that's a really great base one, but if you're looking for one of a different brand, I would say Permanent. So this is Permanent Red. I would say Winsor Red is a good alternative for Winsor Newton, or Cadmium Red Deep Hue is a good one as well. All right. Then another must-have in my palette is Yellow Ochre. I love a good yellow ochre. I just find it's such a beautiful yellow. It's a nice muted yellow. You don't need to have it in your palette. You can mix a yellow ochre by mixing like a cadmium yellow hue or a lemon yellow hue with a tiny bit of purple, like a tiny, tiny bit. You can get kind of like a dulled yellowy, a yellow ochre color. But I find myself using it so much for a lot of my floral work and a lot of like fall stuff too, fall paintings. It's always been a must-have in my palette, and I absolutely love it. And then lastly, yellows are not the biggest deal to me. I find I've loved a lot of yellows. Winsor Lemon, which is a very, very vibrant yellow, is great. Cadmium yellow, just a regular cadmium yellow, is a little bit warmer. I don't mind it. I feel like Winsor Lemon is, or like a lemon yellow is a really great way to go, just because it is so vibrant, but you can also make it a little bit more orangey just by adding a tiny bit of red. Transparent yellow or quinacridone gold. I love these. They're just not in my palette. I don't find myself using them that much, but colors on their own are absolutely stunning. So I would always go for more of like a lemon yellow. I think this is just a permanent yellow. I think this is what this is called. It's not cadmium yellow, it's like permanent yellow or something, which is a nice mid-range yellow. So it's not too vibrant of like a lemon yellow. It was just kind of what was in their package. It was like their primary, or maybe it's called primary yellow? I don't know. But it's a great base yellow. I find you can mix yellows really easily. You can make them a little bit warmer, a little bit more toned down. They're not a make or break deal like a blue is, but those are my colors in my palette. So those are the ones that I currently have. So those are 15 colors. Again, you don't need all of these colors. You can get away with, not having a lavender or even a dark green. Like I have 3 greens, but I absolutely love greens. You don't need all these blues. You don't need a Prussian blue and that phthalo blue. You can get away with having one ultramarine, and then one more brighter blue, like the pale blue or Prussian blue or something. You don't need an orange. I find I never really use orange. I always mix my own orange if I'm going to use it, but I do love having my red, my pink, and my purple, a good yellow, 2 blues, 2 greens, an indigo for mixing, and then a burnt sienna. But again, it's totally up to you. So many people say, what should I get in my palette? What do you recommend? Should I have it the same as yours? How should I arrange it? Your palette is supposed to be for you and your own preference. So don't ever look at someone else and think that it has to be the same way, because it really doesn't. Go with your gut of what you think you'll like. Look around at what other people have and maybe take note of what you like, and what you think you would use most in your palettes, and, you know, put your money towards that. But otherwise, it's really a personal thing and it's up to you. So I hope this gave you a little bit of insight into your palette and what you could use and what you don't need, and that's about it. So that's the video for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you guys next time. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you learned something. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and follow me on all my other platforms for tons more content. Have a wonderful day, guys. Bye.